Hi, Nicki. Thanks for doing this.
Sure. A night of technical difficulties, but all good.
We got it now. So you're looking at what this draft is likely to be. Does it seem to you like there's a clear hierarchy, or does it seem a little bit flatter? And if so, being where you ended up, does that seem like a place where you're going to potentially get the player you want to get?
Yeah, I think it's really early. I mean, I don't think, certainly we wanted to get the number one pick. I think it's like that feeling of Christmas morning. It's that in some ways it's another competition, and even though it's something that is balls and we have nothing to do with, it still feels like we lost, by not at least getting two, because that was where the odds were for us. But on the flip side of that, I talked to Chris, our GM, this morning about it and said it's just really hard this year to know, with the uncertainty of the NCAA, with the uncertainty of COVID in general. Yes, there are juniors that are eligible. Will they come out? How does COVID affect them? And on top of that, not having a Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, one of those type players that you really feel like you've lost if you don't get the number one pick, because those are franchise championship type players. And so, I think as the season plays out, we'll do our homework. The draft may very well depend for us on what happens in free agency. And so if free agency goes the way we want it to go, then we fill in with the draft that way, as opposed to thinking, truly going into free agency and trying to address, what our greatest needs are, and then figure out potentially through the draft how we make ourselves deeper, how we evaluate what we need once we get through free agency.
Michelle Vopel, we'll go to you.
Hey, Coach. I know this is sort of like trying to put together a puzzle where there's so many pieces you don't even know now. But what do you think you most need? If that's going into free agency, if that's what you think you'll need after free agency, just to sort of maybe give us an idea of what you may think you'll be looking for in the draft.
Well, I think for the most part, we need depth in the post. I think as much as anything, I don't think it's any surprise when you look at the success of Seattle, of LA, of Connecticut at times. It's that versatile. We like to use the term hand-skilled four player, and so that player that can really handle the ball, pass it, shoot it, take it off the rim, and get us into offense. And so, there aren't a lot of Brianna Stewarts, but someone who can really affect the game in kind of a point forward position. And you certainly have players that do that in different ways and are better at some things than others. But I think that is something that for sure, statistically, we just didn't shoot the basketball very well outside the paint in the post, and so really being able to stretch the defense, with our posts.
Thank you.
Pepper Persley, go ahead.
Hi, Coach. Nice to talk to you again today.
It's good to have you on here, Pepper.
Thank you. It's good to be talking with you. How are you scouting when you can't watch players in person?
Well, we can a little bit watch players in person, but certainly, we won't be able to probably see as much with a lot of the rules and restrictions and quarantines going from state to state and even internationally. So, we always do a lot of work with film first. When you think about who the draft prospects are, whether they've played 1, 2, or 3 games so far, we've already watched them on Synergy and gone back. If we haven't watched them live, we're bantering about them live, in group texts, and then we go back and we watch it on Synergy, so it's not that different than normal. there is a component to watching a player in person and seeing their mannerisms, sometimes even seeing how they warm up. I'll always make it a point to get to a gym early to see what kind of workout they go through, or are they someone that just kind of sits and watches, and there's no wrong thing. You just want to be able to evaluate, each part of their game. And I think as much as anything, we really want to see them on the practice court, because practice habits oftentimes will carry over and show you like how committed a player is to getting better. Because when the lights come on, you see one thing, and when they're not as bright and they're in the gym and it's a 2 or 3 hour practice, you see a different side of a player.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Jamila Johnson, we'll go to you.
Hey, Coach, thank you for your time.
Sure.
So my question is, I know it's kind of early, so I don't know if you have an update or a status update as far as whether or not Tiffany and Renee will be back. And if you do know, are you kind of considering that in terms of who you're going to pick in free agency and also for the draft?
Yeah. I think with Tiffany's situation, I don't have any doubts that she'll be back. I mean, she, certainly chose to opt out this summer, but has another year under her contract, and hopefully with the vaccine and we will be back playing in arenas and not kind of in that bubble environment. So I anticipate that Tiffany will be back. She and I text regularly. They had a big win today in EuroLeague play. And then, talked to Renee last week with Chris Cienko. And, I think she's still in that mode of trying to figure out what she wants to do. She loves basketball. She doesn't see herself giving up on basketball necessarily. But I think it's all very COVID driven for her. And I think she would tell you the same thing. I mean, she's going to be successful no matter what she does. But I think a lot of it is, she's someone who prepares at a really high level in terms of, how she prepares herself to go into a season. And it's the same way she prepares herself for an ESPN interview, whether she's the host or answering questions. So, I mean, I think when she knows she can get back into a gym comfortably, every state's different. Certainly Georgia's been open, but that doesn't mean that she's super comfortable with the rising numbers. So I think it'll be dictated somewhat on COVID and kind of where things go for her in that direction. But I think that's still to be determined.
Thank you.
Bailey Johnson, we'll go to you.
Hey, Nicki, if as you hope it to in free agency, or even if it doesn't, how do you balance picking best player available versus drafting for positions of need?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not an easy balance sometimes. I think this may be a draft that's very much a best available. And so hopefully you do your damage. I think this is a good draft. I think it's potentially a deep draft, but I don't know right now. We don't have that hierarchy of players in terms of who fits where right now. And certainly certain teams may at this point based on need, or maybe they just love one player or another, or anticipate a player is going to come out that fits a need. And so I think for us, we have to look at free agency as it's great as a draft pick to be in a situation where you're needed and you have to come in and you have to perform for the team to be successful, kind of i.e. Kennedy Carter. And other times you have players that are drafted in the top 5 and it takes some time. I mean, even Morgan Tuck in Connecticut, Rachel Banham in Connecticut were 3 and 4, and there was depth in those positions. And so it took time for them to find their, place and space. So I think sometimes it's just going to come down to what's the right pick, and, where are we looking, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down in terms of, who's coming off contract and, getting a player necessarily ready to be in those roles, as opposed to, anticipating that they have to come in and impact us, because I think we're pretty deep. And if we go get, basically a post who can really handle the ball and shoot it, then I'm not sure that what we draft isn't, just best available, that can be a great player, long-term for us.
Eric Wilson, go ahead.
Nicki, thanks for doing this. I had a question kind of off of the basketball court, if you will. Atlanta has seen a lot of change, especially this year. And I was just curious to know the Dream's involvement with the continuation of speaking out on the social injustices that exist.
Well, I mean, obviously, we've been in a unique situation. And even with the runoff going on here in Georgia, I think Georgia's become the spotlight of the nation, in terms of who controls the Senate. So, there's still a lot going on. I think our players are still staying engaged. We're still supporting, initiatives that they have. But I think we've always had to toe the line to the best of our ability, understanding that, we had an owner that was running for Senate and continues to do so. So, I think when it comes to the broader picture of Black Lives Matter, and, I think we're still supporting the initiatives that are out there. But as much as anything, we have so many of those players overseas right now. So they're trying to figure out how to balance those things as well. I think it was much easier to focus on just basketball and that, when we were in the bubble, versus now them being in Turkey and Spain and, Russia and different places around the world. So, I think for us, it's always been about supporting really their initiatives.
Thank you.
We'll go to Gabe Ibrahim. Go ahead, Gabe.
Hey, Coach. Thanks for taking time. So you mentioned the uncertainty with everything this year. I was wondering if you have are you up to date on everyone's graduation requirements for the juniors that may come out? And then more seriously, how is the free year affecting your draft evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I certainly think there are players a year ago had Michaela Pivic been given an extra year of eligibility. I think she's someone who would have loved to have gone back and competed at Oregon State. But I'm not sure, when I think about, players that this is their fourth season, and if they get 10 games, 12 games, 14 games, if they get an NCAA tournament. And I think a lot of the top seniors, I think, and this is certainly a guess, but, these players know. I mean, there's a finite amount of time to make money playing sports. And so, while, I'm as big a fan of college athletics as anyone, having been in it many, many years, and certainly see value in players having extra eligibility. I also think that a lot of times players, hit that point where it's time to say what's next. And so, will there be a lot of seniors that come back for a fifth year seniors that come back for a sixth year? I mean, in some ways, the NCAA, that's kind of a little bit their own mess to deal with. I guess we'll just have to look at it like the same way we have with juniors, in terms of, them declaring by a certain date. We're just going to have to know on seniors as well because of this. But so I think there's uncertainty there. I think when it comes to the juniors, we certainly know who's age eligible, and we know who there are potentially rumblings about that might be interested in coming out, that can graduate. But that's something and check me on this, but I'm not sure a player has ever come out because they graduated early, as opposed to, them being able and eligible to come out because of age. And so it doesn't mean that they didn't graduate early, just they also were eligible age-wise. So, that's going to be a new thing, certainly if that happens. But we certainly are asking the right questions so that we know that we're evaluating the right players, and certainly there will be some players that, might be interested in coming out and then change their mind. But I think from a prep perspective, we just have to be prepared, to know what we think in both cases. If a player comes out, if they don't come out, where do they fall? Where do they fall on our draft board?
A few more questions here. Brendan Clean, go ahead.
Hey, Nicki, another pandemic related question. I'm just curious if do you kind of watch these early college season games with a little bit more importance, considering we know some might have to get canceled and things like that? You might lose that film on players. Are you watching these early games more closely than you would in a normal season?
Oh, I think we're always watching early season games regardless, simply because sometimes you have these out of conference matchups that are really good, that ESPN will highlight early. For some teams that don't play in as good a conferences at times, this is the best competition they get all season. And then you certainly get to loving to watch certain conference games simply because those teams know each other. They're going to scout better, which is more what they're going to see when they get to our league. So, I think we have to scout every game, period. We've got to get to as many games as we can safely and, socially distance and all those things. But at the same time, we're all in a technological world where we have games at our fingertips all the time. And so we're going to be evaluating all of them, especially with key prospects, with players that we think maybe are, first round type picks. We're going to be really evaluating them. And then as the season gets along and you start to figure out who you like better, or, who's made progress from a year ago, then you start to turn your focus a little bit to, okay, well, what's going to be in the second round that we might like, and start to evaluate that as well. So I think the tough part, for me, COVID related, the thing that's most frustrating this year is I just would like to get out internationally. I think there are some international prospects that I would love to see in person. And I think this is going to be a tough year to do that. So, we'll just see how it all unfolds.
Thank you.
All right, last two questions. We'll go to Erica Ayala and then finish it with Yukiri Thomas. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Coach, I wanted to ask you about the draft pick or that you will have, the high draft pick in particular. Given that last season you didn't have a proper training camp, I mean, WNBA training camps are short regardless. I'm just curious if there's any different strategy that the team plans to take, knowing that potentially maybe there won't be a training camp or even shorter training camp. Are there certain characteristics or things that you would want to prioritize seeing? I'm just curious if and how training camp and maybe not having one would impact the draft.
Well, I think we have, in some ways, at least the luxury of understanding, kind of what that looked like this past year. And as much as, we didn't have a traditional training camp, we still at least had a couple weeks of practice with some scrimmages. And, unfortunately, we only had 9 players, which made it a little more difficult, but, got my assistant coach in shape a little bit in June. So, I don't know that we approach it any differently other than, who fills the gaps that we have. I mean, I think, you're always going to care about your culture. You're always going to want the right pieces, the right personalities, but also the right skill sets. And so, I still think it comes down to all those pieces together, and I think that's where, I certainly think a year ago, we really did our homework on Kennedy, and, there are going to be ups and downs probably with every player, but, I don't think we were surprised because of the work that we did, kind of going into it, both from a basketball perspective and, on the court, off the court, kind of the whole thing. So, I think we'll continue to do a deep dive into anyone that we're serious about drafting And, we ask people that know them, we ask coaches, we ask, we go backwards to AAU coaches. I mean, we're going to do our due diligence because, certainly winning and losing at a high level sometimes comes down to how do the pieces fit together and how does your culture work out. So all of that's going to be important. I don't know that we can differentiate from whether we're going to have, a traditional training camp in market or whether it's going to be some version of, what we saw last year. But I don't think we'll never not have a training camp, whether it's traditional or not, that I can't say, but I don't think there's any, these players, not unlike last year, we're not going to be unprepared going into a season. And, I think considering what we went through, and by we, I mean the league, not just the dream. But I think we put a pretty amazing product out on the floor that put points up on the boards. It was exciting. And so, I think what you saw as a lack of training camp and quite frankly, a lack of practice time through the whole season was you saw not as good a defense across the league. And so much of that is because we had very little time to scout and teach and, kind of do some of the intricate game planning that, we're all used to. So I think the offense was ahead of the defense, that individual players, kind of were able to stand out because of that.